Hello. Thank you for coming to check out my channel. If you are new here, I hope that you enjoy what you're about to watch. And if you're a repeat offender, I appreciate you very much. My name is Jennifer, and this is Jen the Bookworm. So today I'm bringing you my October wrap-up. I had a very good reading month in October. And I had some surprises, and I found some things out about myself, and in all, it was a very positive experience. I read 8 books, and some of them were small, but I did get through 8 pieces of work, and I was very proud of myself, particularly because one of them that I got through was Stephen King's It, and I really thought that, and I think I said on my 2023 TBR video that I might dedicate an entire month just to getting through that book. But I got to thinking about it and looking at it, and the book was only like 44 hours long. It was actually shorter than some of the Brandon Sanderson books that I had read. So anyway, I'll get into that in here in a bit, but I did read that, and I did read a lot of really good things this time, and a couple of things that were like, they weren't all perfect, but I don't think I've had a perfect reading month yet, but I don't know. Let's see. Let's get into what I read. So I started things out kind of early in the month. I read The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and I did that as a buddy read. It started out, I was reading it with Theo from Rekindled Reader, but then a bunch of other people were in on it as well. We had quite a few people jump in and start reading it, which made it a ton of fun to read, because you get to a part that you're like, WTF, and you get to go on the Discord and talk about what's going on, and get other people's opinions and see where they are and see what they're reacting to, and that's a lot of fun. It really enhances the reading experience quite a bit when you get to get opinions from everybody else. And I can't even tell you how excited I am for January. We're doing Joanna, and I'll link her channel below, is doing a Song of Ice and Fire buddy read-along type thing with a bunch of people. A bunch of people are in on that, and I'm one of them who just sort of like, I've only read part of it, so I'd like to read it, but it's going to be so much fun to read along with other people and get their interpretations of things. And that's what happened with Exorcist, and it really enhanced the experience quite a lot. It was an excellent book. Now, I really wanted to read horror, but I wanted to read, because October, it's the spooky month, so I really wanted to read horror, but I didn't want to read like only Stephen King, or I wanted to read something a little bit classic. And I mean, The Exorcist was written in the 70s. I wouldn't call it a classic necessarily yet, but it's getting there. But it's a really good staple of horror, and I hadn't read it, nor have I watched the movie. I still haven't watched the movie. There was some talk about the people who had gotten together to read the book might get together to do like a watch party. And I'm still holding out hope that might happen, but if it doesn't, I have access to it, and I will just watch it. Because you can read and watch scary movies even outside of October. So, but anyway, it was an excellent book. Now, I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was nearly a perfect book. The reason I think I gave it 4.5 instead of 5 itself is because I accessed this through audiobook, and it was narrated by the author, who was excellent. And I think I've already kind of gone over this in another video, so I won't like blather on too long about it, but he was excellent. And there were parts of the book where I really felt like I was drawn in more than I would have been if I was reading it physically. Now, I don't know, because I haven't read it physically, so I don't have that to compare to, but I feel like when he's playing the demon and he has this menacing laugh, and he just adds so much flavor, so much dimension, so much atmosphere to the voice of not only the demon but the priest also, and it's really enhances, I think, the experience. So maybe if I would have read it physically, I wouldn't have given it such a high rating, but because I did audiobook, it was so good. It was nearly perfect. Even if you have read the book before, I highly recommend you go out there and buy the audiobook. It is going to be worth your while. So that was the first book. It wasn't the first book I read in October, but it was the first book on my list here. The second book on my list was Brother by Anya Alborn. Now, I'd heard a lot of stuff about Anya Alborn all of a sudden. Like, I'd never heard of her before. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, Anya Alborn. And so I thought, well, let's do it. She's kind of, I don't know how long she's been on the scene, but as far as my exposure to her, she seems like kind of an up-and-coming horror writer, and she's got a couple books out, and Brother was supposed to be one of her best. There was two of them that I think one of them was called Seed or The Seed, something like that, and Brother were the two that were hailed as some of her finer work. So I had the opportunity to pick up Brother and did. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time reading it. It sustained my interest. It kept me going. I wasn't ever, I don't feel like reading it today. I'll get to it later. I really got to push through. None of that. I felt, intrigued all the way through. The pacing was really good. It wasn't a terribly long book, but it wasn't a very short one either. The only thing about this book, I gave it a 3 out of 5. And the reason I gave it a 3, and 3 is not a bad rating. It's not a bad rating. It's in the middle. It's an average rate. It was a good time. It wasn't, oh my God, absolutely phenomenal, but it wasn't bad. It was good. It was quite enjoyable. The only thing is, there were a couple of big reveals, and I guessed them. And I'm somebody who, I never try to guess what the end is going to be. I always want to go on the journey the author is trying to take me on. So I always just kind of give myself over to the process and just read the book. And I'm never trying to guess. I'm never trying to beat the author by guessing her ending before I get there. None of that. I know people who do that, and it's fine. But I just don't do that. It's too much work. I just want to read and absorb and go on the journey that I'm meant to go on. But I did guess, and I figure if I guessed the ending of it, it's probably pretty obvious, because I'm not very good at guessing, nor do I work at guessing those kind of things. So still, it was an enjoyable read. I did give it 3 stars, and I could see myself rereading this in the future. So I was quite pleased with it. The third book, and I really anticipated this book. I really wanted to love this book. It was Stuff for the Children by John Saul. I love John Saul. He is my favorite horror writer, has been since high school, which has been a fair few years ago. And I picked him up because Stephen King was too cumbersome for me when I was younger. I don't know what it was about it then that didn't resonate with me that it does now, but I picked up John Saul as a replacement, my horror guy, I guess. And I have never read anything of his that's disappointed me until now. And I gave this book a 1 star. And I think I would have given it less if I could. The person who narrated it did a pretty good job. So there was that. But it was an awful book. The story is about a rich family who had a curse put on them. And the curse seems to be that a dominant male in the family will hurt one of the children in the family, kill them, sexually assault them, beat them up, whatever the thing is, and there's no rhyme or reason to the curse. Like in Stephen King's Thinner, sorry if I'm spoiling this for anybody, but he does a thing that causes a gypsy to put a curse on him. He's a heavyset guy, and so they give him the curse of Thinner, and at first he's like losing weight even though he's eating like he normally does, and it's great. But then, towards the end, I mean, if you've read the book, or watched the movie, that it is a true curse, and there's a reason, there's a link, there's a logic to it. There is no rhyme, reason, or logic to this curse. Why was this curse put on this particular family? Why this particular curse? It wasn't even a well-defined curse. It just, all of a sudden, 100 years ago, and within the family, all of a sudden, this guy takes his, I think, niece or daughter, I can't remember which, out into the forest, does horrible things to her, kills her, throws her into a cave, comes home and kills himself. I mean, and then 100 years later, it's going to repeat for I don't know what reason. I couldn't connect to any of the characters. None of the characters made a whole lot of sense to me. I didn't connect with them, and I didn't care about them that much. And there was some good moments, some good writing, I guess, but it was really, really obscured by, it was fine writing. It was just obscured by a bad story. It was just an awful story. I didn't like it at all. Anyway, the end was also really unsatisfying. It was an unsatisfying end to an unsatisfying story. So I do not recommend this book to anybody. Then I read a trio of books that I've already done a video on. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, and The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Now, I did not care for The Haunting of Hill House. I did not care for, I'm not sure if it's I didn't care for the main character or I didn't care for the writing. I'm not sure. So I may have to give Shirley Jackson another try, and I have another one of her books. So it won't cost me anything but time to give her another shot. And if that book is good or I connect with it or whatnot, then I'm just going to say I didn't like Eleanor in this story. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it was structured. I'm afraid it's the writing I didn't like. I don't know. I didn't like it. But I gave it 2 stars. But The Woman in Black was phenomenal by Susan Hill. I really liked that one. I listened to it on audiobook, and usually when I'm listening to an audiobook, I'm doing something else. I'm cleaning the house, I'm driving to pick up my daughter or whatever, or I am playing solitaire, or playing Minecraft or whatever. I happen to be playing Minecraft while I was listening to this. It's not a long listen. And we recently set up a new Minecraft world, so there's lots of stuff to do. So I was kind of going through and doing all the little things that you can do without having to put too much brain power towards it while I'm listening to the story. But as I got to the end of the story, I actually had to shut my avatar into a safe spot, into the house, and just sit and listen. And I don't do that very often with audiobooks. I don't usually I need to have something else going on. But I was so absorbed, and it was so good. And I feel like there were times when I was legitimately creeped out, which is uncommon in horror books. But I really also attribute that to listening to it on an audiobook. I think the atmosphere that was created by the person acting it out was really good. Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I really liked that as well. I really liked it. However, I gave Haunting of Hill House a 2, and I gave The Woman in Black a 4. I only gave this one a 3.5, and the only reason I ticked it down a little bit was because although the writing was excellent and the use of language was beautiful, it wasn't very accessible. And had I not watched The Haunting of Bly Manor, which was based off of this book, and had the direction of the TV show not gone very similarly to the book, I may have had to read the book a couple of times before I really got all of the pieces, just because the wording is very old. It's a classic, so it's an old way of writing, and it's very beautiful. The pictures painted are in your head are very beautiful, but it's not. You have to kind of really listen hard to make sure you heard what you think you heard. However, when listening to the audiobook, it was performed by Emma Thompson, which she's great, so it was not a hard thing to listen to, and it kept my attention the whole time. I enjoyed it, so I gave it a 3.5. This is where I learned something about myself, though. I was reading so many short stories that I started to get a little burnt out. I'm just realizing there was a 9th book I didn't put on my list, and book because it was only a novella. But Hellmouth by Giles Christian. I read that as well. It was only 2 hours on the audiobook, and it's a medieval gothic horror. It was so good, as far as setting, as far as even the story was. It wasn't well developed because it was only like 40 pages long as a book, only like 2 hours long as an audiobook. To me, it was a little bit like making a D&D campaign where everyone wants to play a fighter and you don't have much. The characters are not very different from one another. They're very cookie cutter. They don't stand out. So all the characters in there, with exception of the priest, all seemed very similar. They all were the same character with different names. You just didn't have as much chance to get into them and really, it wasn't a character-driven story, and it couldn't be for that short amount of time. Now, I just wish it was longer. If it was like 7 hours longer, and you could get some really good character development in there, and you could really develop the story. It was good. It was a good story. The atmosphere was wonderful, and the telling of it was good. All that was good. It just was too short. But that's where I started to learn something about myself. After so many short stories, I started to figure out that while I like a good short story or a good novella or a smaller book, especially in between some bigger epics, just reading a short book after short book after short book after short book was not doing it for me. I wasn't able to really dig into anything. There was just not enough material there to dig into. I started to crave something meaty with lots of characters and some development, and take me on a journey, a real journey. And I thought, well, you can't get much meatier and much more character driven than Stephen King. So I decided to read Stephen King It, which, if you've been on this channel, if you've been following me at all, you know that this is my white whale. This book I put down when I was a teenager. I got about halfway through it, and I was just so overwhelmed, I think, by all the description, and I don't know. I think I was overwhelmed. I couldn't do it, and for years I've always been a reader. So people would ask me, ooh, what do you think about Stephen King? Oh, I really love Stephen King. What do you think? And I'm just like, I can't give much of an opinion because I'd only really read Pet Sematary and part of It. Pet Sematary was good, and the part of It that I read, I thought was good, but it was just overwhelming. And so it's kind of, I don't know if haunted me is the right phrase, but I've kind of always wished I hadn't DNF'd it. And so this was my comeback. And so I started reading this, And I listened to it on audiobook, and it was really, really good. The person, Steven Weber, he narrated, and he did such a good job. Really good job. So even though there's a mess of kids, 7 of them, and one of them's a female, so it's a little bit easier to tell her apart from the rest of them. But even when he's going between each male character, you could kind of tell which character he was playing without him having to identify. So that's, I think, a mark of a good narrator. Plus the other characters, and his Pennywise voice was good. So I really enjoyed the narration. I enjoyed the pacing of the book this time so much better than last time. I was surprised at a few places where King felt the need to spoil himself. And I know this has been mentioned before as something he does, and it's annoyed other people too. And it didn't really annoy me, but I didn't understand the choices. Like, there were a couple of times when there could have been a, oh my God, reveal. Except for that he spoiled it 3 chapters before. I don't get that. I don't get why. You have such a great idea. You have such a great path that you're going down. Why spoil it? Also, as much as I love the audiobook, and I did, and the narrator was great, I am not 100% sure that the audiobook is the best way to consume the last third of the book, or the last fourth of the book, or something like that. Because so throughout the book, Stephen King does this thing where he has these chapters and he breaks them up into mini chapters or sections, right? And sometimes he will leave off in the middle of a sentence at the end of this section and pick it back up at the beginning of this section. That's not that big a deal. With the audiobook, it's just a long pause in between the sentence. A couple of times it's made me check to make sure my phone didn't malfunction. But towards the end, he starts doing, he does that mechanic, but he's having, say, Eddie Casbrack, 12-year-old Eddie Casbrack starts the sentence, and then, the adult Eddie Casbrack finishes the sentence. So we have gone, not different point of view necessarily, but different timeline jumps in the middle of the sentence. And the end of this sentence actually corresponded to the beginning of another section way over here. And the beginning of this sentence will correspond with the end of another sentence further on down the line. And that's a little confusing. With a paper book, I could just kind of flip back and forth and just kind of read the whole sentence. And that's harder to do with an audiobook. So I'm not sure. It wasn't difficult necessarily to find out where I was, except for there's one character that doesn't make it into adulthood, or doesn't come back with the others. I don't want to spoil, but it's an old book and a couple movies and stuff, so you probably already know. But without saying names, doesn't come back, and when that character is present, then I know that we're in the 50s, and when that character is not present, then I know that we're in the 80s. And so there were a couple of times when I felt like the switching of timelines and characters was done in a little more confusing way for the audiobook. But I did get through it. It was fine. I wasn't bothered by that part at the end that everyone seems to harp on. The problematic, whatever. When I heard about it, before I read the book, I'd heard about it. And I was confused as to why he'd put that in there. And what purpose did it serve? Other than, I don't know, are we doing sex for the sake of sex or what? Having read it now, I see the context that it's in, and it doesn't actually bother me all that much. I think there are better ways to do what he was doing, but I kind of get what he was trying to do. And it is what it is. That part didn't bother me. What did bother me was the overuse of the N-word. And I know it was written back then, and I know that it was written about a time in which, in the 50s, I don't know that anyone cared about the N-word. I'm sure black people cared because it was an insult. It was meant as an insult even back then. But I don't think that as a whole, white people cared that much about it. In the 80s, it was considered rude, but it was still used. And so, okay, it's in the book, and it gives kind of a feeling and authenticity to the book and stuff. But sometimes it just feels like it was overused. Like it was, oh my God, are we in a race to see how many times we can use the N-word in this book? And you know, I'm a product of my environment. I was born in the 70s. I mean, I'm not, you know, millennial. I'm not a Zoomer. I'm, you know, not clutching my pearls necessarily, but even I was bothered by this, and I feel like it was just maybe overdone. But at this point, it was a book that was written ages ago. It's not like you can rewrite it, or even like maybe you even should rewrite it for then, because that was our history. That's kind of how we were as a country back then. But just the overuse of the word kind of bothered me a little bit. Not enough to pull me out of the story, just that bothered me way more than the problematic sex scene at the end that everyone has a problem with. Still, I gave the book a 4 out of 5. I really loved the coming of age, the slice of life, the friendship between them. I really, really liked that. Plus, some of it was, I don't know, reminiscent of my childhood too. I wasn't a child in the 50s, but you know, everyone get on your bikes and go. You know, your bikes are like your vehicles, and everyone, all the kids have a bike, and they all go away from the home and spend all day away with their friends. That kind of childhood stuff that was kind of fun to revisit. Anyway, I read that and I really enjoyed that. And I read it in a couple of weeks, not an entire month like I thought it was going to take me. I think it only took me a week and a half to 2 weeks to read, and I was pleased with that. The last book that I read, and I only read it really because I had a couple days left in October, I decided to pick up Carmilla, A Vampire Tale, by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. And I enjoyed it okay. It kept me interested enough to keep reading it. It wasn't a slog or anything. It wasn't very big. It was only like 3 hours long, so it's hard to... If there's a slog in a 3-hour long book, you got a problem. But it wasn't difficult to get through. Maybe it was just because of, you know, it's an old book. Maybe just because of what it is and stuff. I thought it was just okay. I gave it a lukewarm 3. It wasn't bad, but there was no real exciting parts in it. It was very predictable who the vampire was through the whole thing. It was more just a journey of how they find out that she's a vampire, and I don't know, it was just okay. It was just okay for me. So that was my October. I enjoyed reading a lot of those stories. I enjoyed having a month of scary, spooky ghost stories and you know, killer clown stories and whatnot. I really enjoyed the month in that sense. And I have already started on my November Read It or Delete It challenge. I have already chosen my first book, Windrunner, by John Messenger, I believe his name is. And I already DNF'd it. It was not for me. But I chose a second book. It's a Michael Palmer book, and I think I might have better luck with this one. So I am going along, and you'll see a video. I'm doing kind of a vlog on the first couple of books that I read or delete, and I hope to get that up in the next couple of days. But I'm already full steam ahead on that, so I'm hoping it will be a fun November to, you know, probably it'll be a little scattered, but I hope it'll be fun to go through and read all those books that I had previously bought that were just sitting on my Kindle. Time to do some housework and clean up that Kindle. So that's what I have for you today, and I thank you very much for coming and visiting. If you enjoyed this content, please give it a like. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. It's free to you, and it really helps out my channel quite a bit. And if you have any comments about any of the books that I read, the ones I liked and didn't like. Please feel free to put comments down below. If there are other Shirley Jackson stories that you think maybe I should read to get a better idea of her, feel free to put those in the comments. I will check out. I give her another shake, and let me know what you're reading in November. I'm very interested. And with that, I'm gonna let you go, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.